Girls Anthology. Women cut their hair short and brought magic into human language. Back when the kingdom was still at peace, the days of Aileen, the first princess, began with a corset and ended with a corset. Every morning the handmaidens came into her room. They wrapped a corset made of bone around her waist and pulled the laces tight from behind. She could not even breathe properly. Her ribs pressed inward, and if she walked even a little too quickly, her breath caught in her throat. The dresses were heavy, her hair was braided long and pinned up every morning, and in etiquette lessons she was taught over and over to lift only the corners of your mouth when you smile, and never hold your gaze too straight. Her brothers trained with swords, rode horses, went out hunting. Aileen watched all of it only through a window. All you have to do is stay pretty. Once you're married off, that's the end of it. Every time the queen said that, Aileen lowered her head. She hated being nothing but pretty, but there was nowhere for her to say that she hated it. The corset was not simply a garment that squeezed the body. It was a life in which even the way she breathed was decided by someone else. In those same years, Chelsea lived in a rundown alley house on the outskirts of the kingdom. Her father had died early, and her mother lay ill in bed. Chelsea got by from day to day doing odd jobs at the market. To others she was a quiet, cold-eyed commoner woman. That woman, her eyes are fierce. Sitting there with her nose in a book all day, it's off-putting. Words like that trailed behind her back. Because she too was a woman, there were times she had to wear something like an old corset, cinching her waist, when she went to work in other people's houses. Her breath would tighten, her movements would dull, and her body was bound along with the words, "You have to look like a woman." Chelsea hated that garment. She liked books better. Old hieroglyphs, foreign dictionaries, the miscellaneous notes travelers left behind. When she looked at letters, she saw structure. When she heard sounds, she caught patterns. It was not something she had learned. She had simply been born with that sense. Originally, there was no such thing as magic in this kingdom. People fought with swords and spears and bows. Knights charged on horseback, archers loosed arrows, farmers took up spears and held the rear. That was all there was to war. The priests prayed to their god, but not once had a prayer actually raised fire or split the sky. It was merely an old habit. The center of power had always been in the bodies of men. Those with broad shoulders and thick arms, who could bring a spear down in a single stroke. The kingdom raised such bodies into knights, and it turned around them. The change began when strange people came over from beyond the eastern mountains. Their skin was white, their eyes round, their bodies small. From a distance they could even look like children. But up close, their limbs would multiply into 6, or their mouths would open abnormally wide and let out a strange sound. That sound set the air vibrating, and the vibration burrowed into the human body. The first order of knights to meet them was all but wiped out. They stabbed with spears and cut with swords, but the moment the other opened its mouth, their bodies collapsed from inside the armor. The kingdom was seized with terror, and at the same time it grew greedy. They captured several of them alive. They shut them in wooden cages, bound them in chains, and began to listen to the sounds. At first they handled them as though torturing them. They beat them, starved them, cut them, trying to force the sounds out. But the sounds that came out that way were incomplete. That was when the kingdom began looking for people who could listen. They lined people up in the square. Knights, scholars, servants, even the princes. They were made to listen to the sound of the alien creatures in the cages and to repeat it. Most of the men could not hold out even 10 minutes. Their heads hurt as if splitting open, their noses bled, they fainted. One man endured half a day before collapsing, vomiting blood. Men who had prided themselves on yielding to no one in strength crumbled before a sound. Their momentary muscle was greater, but they were not suited to holding that vibration inside the body and enduring it for days. Many of the women collapsed as well, but some of them remained. Chelsea in particular stood out. A woman of common birth whose name was hardly known. She stood in front of that cage for 3 days. Her face went pale and her fingertips trembled, but she kept listening to the sound until the very end. At first it simply hurt. Her head split, her ears went numb, her body burned with fever. But as time passed, The sound began to break apart into pieces. Some parts were high, some low, some repeated. Like a broken sentence. Chelsea gathered up those fragments. Something like an etymology, something like wreckage. She could not understand it completely, but she could repeat it. When she first let that sound out of her mouth, a strange vibration lingered in the air. The leaves shook, and the ground rang faintly. That was the beginning of magic. Originally, there had been no magic in this world. It came into being when one woman listened to the language of another kind of being and wrote it again with her own mouth. It was not long after that when Aileen took her place in that line. The princess took off her corset and cut her hair short. Her handmaidens wept and tried to stop her, and the queen went down on her knees to stop her. But Aileen simply walked out to the square. When the test began, her body shook violently. Her breath came short, and blood ran from her ears. And yet, strangely, the memory of the corset that had forced her to hold her breath so long, and the patience of etiquette lessons where she had to stand straight for hours, helped her endure that pain. 3 days passed, and she did not fall. And so, among those who remained, the day came when Aileen and Chelsea went out to the battlefield together for the first time. It was the Eastern Plain, the hour when the dawn mist had not yet lifted. The male infantry stood at the very front and raised their shields. They already knew that the only thing they could do was buy time with their bodies. When the aliens' cry came, they pushed their shields forward. When the claws came down, they threw their bodies in. When they bled, they poured crude healing spells over themselves. They might come out ahead in strength, but they were not suited to enduring this vibration for days on end. Behind them stood Aileen. She wore a black tactical surcoat, and dust had settled in her close-cropped hair. Chelsea stood beside her. Chelsea did not go into battle herself. Instead, she held a small crystal orb, listening in real time to the sounds coming from Aileen's mouth. She was the one who had studied the sounds of the captured ones for a long time. She had gathered the incomplete sentences and reassembled them into a form that human vocal cords could pronounce. "I'm starting," Aileen said in a low voice. When the first sentence came out, a silver vibration spread through the air. As the second sentence followed, that vibration slowly began to bloom like petals. It was a beautiful light, but Aileen's voice was cracking. Her throat felt as if it were tearing, and her veins ran hot. The longer the sentences went on, the more blue bruises bloomed across her back. It was the mark that language leaves on a human body. Chelsea looked into the crystal orb and said quietly, "Second passage, your breath is short. A little more slowly. If the sentence collapses, the toxicity spreads faster." Instead of answering, Aileen clenched her teeth. When the last sentence fell, silver petals shot up into the sky. Light poured down. The bodies of the enemy scattered soundlessly into ash. The battlefield fell silent.